Here are a few things Ray Bradbury wrote about Fahrenheit 451, reproduced in the 60th anniversary edition. From The Day After Tomorrow, Why Science Fiction? First appeared in The Nation on May 2nd, 1953. 3 years ago, I wrote a short novel entitled The Fireman, which told the story of a municipal department in the year 1999 that came to your house to start fires instead of to put them out. If your neighbors suspected you of reading a mildly subversive book, or any book at all for that matter, they simply turned in an alarm. The hose-bearing sensors then thundered up in their red engines and squirted kerosene on your books, your house, and sometimes on you. Then a match was struck. This short novel was intended as science fiction. Elsewhere in the narrative, I described my fireman arriving home after midnight to find his wife in bed afflicted with 2 varieties of stupor. She is in a trance, a condition so withdrawn as to resemble catatonia, compounded of equal parts liquor and a small seashell thimble radio tucked in her ear. The seashell croons and murmurs its music and commercials and private little melodramas for her alone. The room is silent. The husband cannot even try to guess the communion between seashell and wife. Awakening her is not unlike applying shock to a cataleptic. I thought I was writing a story of prediction, describing a world that might evolve in 4 or 5 decades. But only a month ago, in Beverly Hills one night, a husband and wife passed me, walking their dog. I stood staring after them, absolutely stunned. The woman held in one hand a small cigarette package-sized radio, its antenna quivering. From this sprang tiny copper wires, which ended in a dainty cone plugged into her right ear. There she was, oblivious to man and dog, listening to far winds and whispers and soap opera cries, sleepwalking, helped up and down curbs by a husband who might just as well have not been there. This was not science fiction. This was a new fact in our changing society. As you can see, I must start writing very fast about our future world in order to stand still. I thought I had raced ahead of science, predicting the radio-induced semi-catatonic. In the long haul, science pulled abreast, tipped its hat, and fed me the dust. The woman with the radio thimble crammed in her ear the other night symbolized my failure to count on certain psychological needs which demanded satisfaction earlier than I supposed. Whether or not my ideas on censorship via the fire department will be old hat by this time next week, I dare not predict. When the wind is right, a faint odor of kerosene is exhaled from Senator McCarthy. So much depends, of course, on what the individual hears when he gives himself over to the electronic tides breaking on the shore of his seashell. The voice of conscience and reason, an echo of morality, a new thought, a fresh idea, a morsel of philosophy, or bias, hatred, fear, prejudice, nightmare, lies, half-truths, and suspicions, or perhaps even worse, the sound of one emptiness striking hollowly against yet another and another emptiness, broken at 2-minute intervals by a jolly commercial, preferably in rhymed quatrains or couplets. In writing a science fiction story around such an idea, the author must consider many things. Is there, for instance, a delicate interplay where the society does not crush the individual, but where the individual realizes that without his cooperation, society would fly to pieces through the centrifugal force of anarchy? Is the programming on such an ear-button receiver of a caliber to enable a man to be a gyroscope, both taking from and giving to society, beautifully balanced? Does it tell him what to do every hour and every minute of every day? Or, fearing knowledge of any sort, tell him nothing, and spoon-feed him mush? The challenge and the fun come in handling all the above ideas and materials in such a way as to predict how perversely, or how well, man will use himself, and therefore his mechanical extensions, in the coming time of our lives. This, I think, should answer why I have more often than not written stories which, for a convenient label, are called science fiction. There are few literary fields, it seems to me, that deal so strikingly with themes that concern us all today. There are few more exciting genres. There are none fresher or so full of continually renewed and renewable concepts. It is, after all, the fiction of ideas, the fiction where philosophy can be tinkered with, torn apart, and put back together again. It is the fiction of sociology and psychology and history, compounded and squared by time. It is the fiction where you may set up and knock down your own political and religious and moral states. It can be a high form of Swiss watchmaking. It can be poetry. It has resulted in some of the greatest writing in our past, from Plato and Lucian to Sir Thomas More and Francois Rabelais, and on down through Jonathan Swift and Johannes Kepler to Poe and Edward Bellamy and George Orwell. I once strongly suspected that fun was the handmaiden, if not the progenitor, of the arts. Now I know this for certain. And with a great sense of pleasure and personal well-being, I intend to continue in the field for a good many years, along with those others who are interested in trying to find a bridge to cross, that vast gulf of communication, permanently for all of us. I do not know whether tomorrow's street will be full of human beings with seashell thimble radios whispering in their ears, and all the world and its problems moved away and neglected. Or whether, by some miracle, we may all carry supersonic stethoscopes with us on our rounds, so that each may know the sound of every other human heart. I only know that it would be interesting to walk on that street and think about it and write about it before that evening sun goes down. Fahrenheit 451, audio introduction by Ray Bradbury. This was Bradbury's commentary on the making of the novel from the Listening Library's 1976 2LP recording of the author reading extensive passages from the novel. I think it's always fascinating, at least it's always fascinating to me, to discuss the genesis of a short story or a poem or a novel. I look upon ideas as great big bulldogs that bite me, grab me, hold on, and won't let go. And when I get a good idea, it simply seizes me and holds on very tightly. And maybe an hour later, or 10 hours later, or 2 days later, it lets go and I'm finished with it. I'm not in control. I have no schedule for my life. These ideas just come up and beg to bite me, and I let them. I've learned, over the years, to go with this sort of thing. I was walking with a friend, and a police car pulled up and asked us what we were doing, and I made the mistake of saying, putting one foot in front of the other, which was the wrong answer. The policeman interrogated us, thinking that we were up to some terrible criminal activity. The whole logic of the situation was beyond him. I became so enraged with the encounter, the fact that my innocence was doubted, that I ran home and wrote an angry short story called The Pedestrian. Well, now, if it hadn't been for that encounter with that policeman, a lot of other wonderful things would never have happened. When I look back now, I realize how fortunate it was that policeman stopped me that particular night. because it set in order, and in a certain kind of emotional progression, a whole series of things rolling. Not only did I finish the short story The Pedestrian, but then, a number of months or perhaps a year later, I took that pedestrian out into the streets of the city of the future, and I wandered that pedestrian around. And along the way, I changed the sex of that pedestrian from a man to a girl named Clarice McClellan, and I had her out walking late at night, scuffing the leaves, looking at the stars, smelling the wind, waiting for rain. And she smells kerosene. Around the corner, from the other direction, comes a man smelling of kerosene, and she speaks to him and says, "Oh, I know who you are. I know what you do. I can tell from the smell of the kerosene on your uniform. You are a fireman. You're one of those men who goes to places to start fires." Well, my gosh, I didn't know she was going to be saying that. I didn't know Montague was going to be coming around the corner. I became very excited, and within 7, 8, 9 days, I finished the first draft of a short story that turned into a novel, that turned into a longer novel called The Fireman. And in order to finish the novel, I had no office. I looked around for a good place to write this fantastic story that was coming to birth, and I thought, well, what's a better place to write a novel about book burning in the future than a library? And I discovered in that time that wonderful downstairs basement room in the UCLA library with the typewriter that you fed a dime into every half hour. So I sat there and fed dimes into that typewriter for 8 or 9 days, 20 cents an hour, and finished the short novel, The Fireman, on that typewriter, in a room with 10 or 15 or 20 other students who didn't know what I was up to. But what a wonderful place to write a novel about the future, and about books, and about libraries. Also, I wrote very quickly, because I wanted to be very honest. I wanted to be emotionally honest. I've always believed in quick writing, so that I could get things out before I had time to think about them. I wanted to be true to whatever inner logic there was in myself. I didn't want to be true to any one group of people in the world. I wanted to be true to my own anger. I've always been afraid of belonging to groups. I don't want to be a Democrat or a Republican or a communist or a fascist or just an all-American. I wanted to be, as far as I can be, myself, and find out what I think, and get it out in the open, and then intellectualize about it, and see what I think. So suddenly, here I am, writing an angry, short novel, because I lived in that particular year in 1950, at a time at the end of World War II, when politics in the United States were going through a very difficult period, when we had Joseph McCarthy, the strange senator, on our hands, who was trying to browbeat us and trying to scare us. So it was a combination of many things that went into my anger and caused me to write the novel. And when I finished it and published a short version of it, we were still in the midst of the scare period in our political history. Even President Truman was running scared at that time. I decided I would like to do a longer version of it, and I sat down, in a similar 9 or 10 day period, added another 15, 20, 25,000 words to it, again with the same sort of emotional resources. I wanted to be emotional, so I could get all of my own truths out, so that I wouldn't be slanting toward any one particular group. As a result of writing the novel in this way, it's a great adventure. That's the first thing it is. It has things to say politically. It has things to say aesthetically. It has things to say about literature. It has all sorts of intellectual things to say along the way, but they are enclosed in an emotional framework, which is very important. I believe in having fun first, and along the way, if you teach people, if you influence people, well and good. But I don't want to set out to influence people. I don't want to set out to change the world in any self-conscious way. That way leads to self-destruction. That way, you're pontificating, and that's dangerous, and it's boring. You're going to put people right to sleep. So instead of doing that, I've always loved adventure stories. I've always loved adventure films. I've loved murder mysteries and science fiction adventures. I took a framework, then, of suspense. Actually, a pursuit and escape thing. And you then hang on all the things that you want to say, all the things that you want to do about a particular time that you live in, about a time that you would like to prevent, because I'm a preventer of futures. I'm not a predictor of them. So Montag is myself running through the future, as afraid as I am at times. Brave only because he's angry. I'm not a brave person. I'm an angry person on occasion. And along the way, meeting other people who are really myself. A character like Faber, who pops up in the novel later on, and is Montag's conscience speaking to him in the night through his little seashell radio. Well, that really is myself, hiding away, the writer who's afraid to come out in the open and has to get all of his kicks and do all of his influencing of the world by whispering in people's ears. And I suppose that's what I do. I'm like Faber, whispering in people's ears and telling them what to do, here and there, along the way. So, Faber is a part of myself. Even the fire chief, I suppose, when you come right down to it, is a part of myself that could be destructive, if I allowed that destructive self to come to the surface. So here we have, then, Montag running through the future, pursued by book burners trying to save knowledge. And all this goes back into my own background when I was a child. I'm a library-educated person. I've never made it to college. When I left high school, I began to go to the library every day of my life for 5, 10, 15 years. So the library was my nesting place. It was my birthing place. It was my growing place. And my books are full of libraries and librarians and book people and booksellers. So my love of books is so intense that I finally have done what? I have written a book about a man falling in love with books. How unusual that is. It's not a love story on any other level. And when the film finally came out, it wasn't a love story, except it was the love story of Montag and literature. I think that's quite unusual in the history of the world. I don't think there are very many writers around who have written that many books, about libraries, about knowledge, and how precious it is, and how we must keep it. And finally, how did I title this? Well, I called it all sorts of things along the way. At one time it was called Long After Midnight. It was called The Fireman for a while. But I didn't like any of those titles, and then I asked myself, well, what is the temperature that books catch fire at and burn? And I called the UCLA Physics Department, and I called the Chemistry Department, and I called several other universities. Nobody knew, and nobody seemed to be able to look it up for me. And finally a light went on in my head, and I called the fire department. And I said, put me through to the fire chief. I got hold of the fire chief here in Los Angeles, and I said, at what temperature does book paper catch fire and burn? He said, just a minute, be right back. He came back and said, 451 Fahrenheit. And I thought, oh, that's beautiful. That's absolutely beautiful. It's perfect. So I reversed it and said Fahrenheit 451. And there you have the title. And if we start using Celsius in the next few years, I will be severely disappointed. From its initial publication in 1953 until 1967, editions of Fahrenheit 451 carried no author's introduction at all. Bradbury composed his most extensive introduction in 1982 for the Limited Editions Club. In 1989 it was titled and reprinted for Zen in the Art of Writing. Investing Dimes, Fahrenheit 451. I didn't know it, but I was literally writing a dime novel. In the spring of 1950, it cost me $9.80 to write and finish the first draft of The Fireman, which later became Fahrenheit 451. In all the years from 1941 to that time, I had done most of my typing in the family garages, either in Venice, California, where we lived because we were poor, not because it was the in place to be, or behind the tract house where my wife, Marguerite, and I raised our family. I was driven out of my garage by my loving children, who insisted on coming around to the rear window and singing and tapping on the panes. Father had to choose between finishing a story or playing with the girls. I chose to play, of course, which endangered the family income. An office had to be found. We couldn't afford one. Finally, I located just the place, the typing room in the basement of the library at the University of California at Los Angeles. There, in neat rows, were a score or more of old Remington or Underwood typewriters, which rented out at a dime a half hour. You thrust your dime in, the clock ticked madly, and you typed wildly to finish before the half hour was out. Thus I was twice driven, by my children to leave home, and by a typewriter timing device to be a maniac at the keys. Time was indeed money. I finished the first draft in roughly 9 days. At 25,000 words, it was half the novel it eventually would become. Between investing dimes and going insane when the typewriter jammed, for there went your precious time, and whipping pages in and out of the device, I wandered upstairs. There I strolled, lost in love, down the corridors and through the stacks, touching books, pulling volumes out, turning pages, thrusting volumes back, drowning in all the good stuffs that are the essence of libraries. What a place, don't you agree, to write a novel about burning books in the future? So much for pasts. What about Fahrenheit 451 in this day and age? Have I changed my mind about much that it said to me when I was a younger writer? Only if by change you mean has my love of libraries widened and deepened, to which the answer is a yes that ricochets off the stacks and dusts talcum off the librarian's cheeks. Since writing this book, I have spun more stories, novels, essays, and poems about writers than any other writer in history that I can think of. I have written poems about Melville and Emily Dickinson as in Charles Dickens, Hawthorne, Poe, Edgar Rice Burroughs, and along the way I compared Jules Verne and his mad captain to Melville and his equally obsessed mariner. I have scribbled poems about librarians, taken night trains with my favorite authors across the continental wilderness, staying up all night gambling and drinking and chatting. I warned Melville in one poem to stay away from land, it never was his stuff, and turned Bernard Shaw into a robot, so as to conveniently stow him aboard a rocket and wake him on the long journey to Alpha Centauri to hear his prefaces piped off his tongue and into my delighted ear. I have written a time machine story in which I hum back to sit at the deathbeds of wild Melville and Poe, to tell of my love and warm their bones in their last hours. But enough. As you can see, I am madness, maddened when it comes to books, writers, and the great granary silos where their wits are stored. Recently, with the Studio Theater Playhouse in Los Angeles at hand, I called all my characters from F451 out of the shadows. What's new, I said to Montague, Clarice, Faber, Beatty, since we last met in 1953? I asked. They answered. They wrote new scenes, revealed odd parts of their as yet undiscovered souls and dreams. The result was a 2-act drama, staged with good results and, in the main, fine reviews. Beatty came farthest out of the wings in answer to my question. How did it start? When did you make the decision to become fire chief, a burner of books, Beatty's surprising answer came in a scene where he takes our hero, Guy Montag, home to his apartment. Entering, Montag is stunned to discover the thousands upon thousands of books lining the walls of the fire chief's hidden library. Montag turns and cries out to his superior, "But you're the chief burner. You can't have books on your premises." To which the chief, with a dry, light smile, replies, "It's not owning books that's a crime, Montag. It's reading them. Yes, that's right. I own books, but I don't read them." Montag, in shock, awaits Beatty's explanation. "Don't you see the beauty, Montag? I never read them. Not one book, not one chapter, not one page, not one paragraph. I do play with ironies, don't I? To have thousands of books and never crack one? To turn your back on the lot and say, 'No.' It's like having a house full of beautiful women, and smiling, not touching one. So, you see, I'm not a criminal at all. If you ever catch me reading one, yes, then turn me in. But this place is as pure as a 12-year-old virgin girl's cream-white summer night bedroom. These books die on the shelves. Why? Because I say so. I do not give them sustenance, no hope with hand or eye or tongue. They are no better than dust." Montag protests. "I don't see how you can't be—" "Tempted?" cries the fire chief. "Oh, that was long ago. The apple is eaten and gone. The snake has returned to its tree. The garden has grown to weed and rust." "Once," Montag hesitates, then continues, "once you must have loved books very much." "Touché," the fire chief responds. "Below the belt, on the chin, through the heart, ripping the gut. Oh, look at me, Montag. The man who loved books. No, the boy who was wild for them, insane for them, who climbed the stacks like a chimpanzee gone mad for them. I ate them like salad. Books were my sandwich for lunch, my tiffin and dinner and midnight munch. I tore out the pages, ate them with salt, doused them with relish, gnawed on the bindings, turned the chapters with my tongue. Books by the dozen, the score, the billion. I carried so many home, I was hunchbacked for years. Philosophy, art history, politics, social science, the poem, the essay, the grandiose play, you name 'em, I ate 'em. And then. The fire chief's voice fades. Montag prompts, "And then?" "Why, life happened to me." The fire chief shuts his eyes to remember. "Life. The usual, the same. The love that wasn't quite right, the dream that went sour, the sex that fell apart, the deaths that came swiftly to friends not deserving, the murder of someone or another, the insanity of someone close, the slow death of a mother, the abrupt suicide of a father, the stampede of elephants, the onslaught of disease, and nowhere the right book for the right time to stuff in the crumbling wall of the breaking dam to hold back the deluge, give or take a metaphor, lose or find a simile. And by the far edge of 30, and near the rim of 31, I picked myself up, every bone broken, every centimeter of flesh abraded, bruised, or scarred. I looked in the mirror and found an old man lost behind the frightened face of a young man. Saw a hatred there for everything and anything. You name it. I'll damn it. And opened the pages of my fine library books and found what? Montag guesses. The pages were empty. Bullseye! Blank! Oh, the words were there all right, but they ran over my eyes like hot oil, signifying nothing, offering no help, no solace, no peace, no harbor, no true love, no bed, no light. Montag thinks back. 30 years ago. The final library burnings. On target, Beatty nods. And, having no job, and being a failed romantic, or whatever in hell, I put in for fireman first class. First up the steps, first into the library, first in the burning furnace heart of his ever-blazing countrymen. Douse me with kerosene, hand me my torch. End of lecture. There you go, Montag, out the door. Montag leaves, with more curiosity than ever about books, well on his way to becoming an outcast, soon to be pursued and almost destroyed by the mechanical hound, my robot clone, of Arthur Conan Doyle's great Baskerville Beast. In my play, Old Man Faber, the teacher not quite in residence, speaking to Montague through the long night via the seashell tamp-in ear radio, is victimized by the fire chief. How? Beatty suspects Montague is being instructed by such a secret device, knocks it out of his ear, and shouts at the far-removed teacher, "We're coming to get you! We're at the door! We're up the stairs! Gotcha!" Which so terrifies Faber, his heart destroys him. All good stuff. Tempting this late in time. I've had to fight not to stuff it into the novel. Finally, many readers have written protesting Clarice's disappearance, wondering what happened to her. Francois Truffaut felt the same curiosity, and in his film version of my novel, rescued Clarice from oblivion and located her with the book people wandering in the forest, reciting their litany of books to themselves. I felt the same need to save her, for after all, she, verging on silly, star-struck chatter, was in many ways responsible for Montague's beginning to wonder about books and what was in them. In my play, Clarice emerges to welcome Montague and give a somewhat happier ending to what was, in essence, pretty grim stuff. The novel, however, remains true to its former self. I don't believe in tampering with any young writer's material, especially when that young writer was once myself. Montague, Beatty, Mildred, Faber, Clarice, all stand, move, enter, and exit, as they did 32 years ago, when I first wrote them down, at a dime a half hour in the basement of the UCLA library. I have not changed one thought or one word. A last discovery. I write all of my novels and stories, as you have seen, in a great surge of delightful passion. Only recently, glancing at the end, I realized that Montague is named after a paper manufacturing company, and Faber, of course, is a maker of pencils. What a sly thing my subconscious was to name them thus, and to not tell me. In the fall of 1978, a Missouri high school English teacher and his students discovered that student copies of Fahrenheit 451 differed from the teacher's personal copy. Certain words or phrases deemed controversial or offensive had been eliminated from the special edition printed for school-age readers more than a decade earlier. The class may not have been the first group of readers to notice the differences, but they were the first to write to Ray Bradbury, who was unaware of the changes. A restored edition soon followed in 1979, completely reset and concluding with Bradbury's final word on the sanctity of texts. Coda. Almost 2 years ago, a letter arrived from a solemn young Vassar lady telling me how much she enjoyed reading my experiment in space mythology, The Martian Chronicles. But she added, wouldn't it be a good idea, this late in time, to rewrite the book, inserting more women's characters and roles? A few years before that, I got a certain amount of mail concerning the same Martian book, complaining that the blacks in the book were Uncle Tom's, and why didn't I do them over? Along the same time came a note from a Southern white suggesting that I was prejudiced in favor of the blacks and the entire story should be dropped. 2 weeks ago, my mountain of mail delivered forth a pipsqueak mouse of a letter from a well-known publishing house that wanted to reprint my story The Foghorn in a high school reader. In my story, I had described a lighthouse as having, late at night, an illumination coming from it that was a god light. Looking up at it from the viewpoint of any sea creature, one would have felt that one was in the presence. The editors had deleted godlight and in the presence. Some 5 years back, the editors of yet another anthology for school readers put together a volume with some 400 count 'em, short stories in it. How do you cram 400 short stories by Twain, Irving, Poe, Maupassant, and Bierce into one book? Simplicity itself. Skin, debone, demarrow, scarcify, melt, render down, and destroy. Every adjective that counted, every verb that moved, every metaphor that weighed more than a mosquito, out. Every simile that would have made a sub-moron's mouth twitch, gone. Any aside that explained the two-bit philosophy of a first-rate writer, lost. Every story, slenderized, starved, blue-penciled, leached, and bled white, resembled every other story. Twain read like Poe, read like Shakespeare, read like Dostoevsky, read like, in the finale, Edgar Guest. Every word of more than 3 syllables had been razored. Every image that demanded so much as one instant's attention shot dead. Do you begin to get the damned and incredible picture? How did I react to all of the above? By firing the whole lot. By sending rejection slips to each and every one. By ticketing the assembly of idiots to the far reaches of hell. The point is obvious. There is more than one way to burn a book. And the world is full of people running about with lit matches. Every minority, be it Baptist, Unitarian, Irish, Italian, octogenarian, Zen Buddhist, Zionist, Seventh-day Adventist, Women's Lib, Republican, Mattachine, Foursquare Gospel, feels it has the will, the right, the duty to douse the kerosene, light the fuse. Every dimwit editor who sees himself as the source of all dreary blancmange, plain porridge, unleavened literature, licks his guillotine, and eyes the neck of any author who dares to speak above a whisper or write above a nursery rhyme. Fire Captain Beatty, in my novel Fahrenheit 451, described how the books were burned first by minorities, each ripping a page or a paragraph from this book, then that, until the day came when the books were empty, and the mines shut, and the libraries closed forever. "Shut the door, they're coming through the window, shut the window, they're coming through the door," are the words to an old song. They fit my lifestyle with newly arriving butcher censors every month. Only 6 weeks ago, I discovered that, over the years, some cubbyhole editors at Ballantine Books, fearful of contaminating the young, had, bit by bit, censored some 75 separate sections from the novel. Students, reading the novel, which, after all, deals with censorship and book burning in the future, wrote to tell me of this exquisite irony. Judy Lynn Del Rey, one of the new Ballantine editors, is having the entire book reset and republished this summer with all the dams and hells back in place. A final test for old Job II here. I sent a play, Leviathan 99, off to a university theater a month ago. My play is based on the Moby Dick mythology, dedicated to Melville, and concerns a rocket crew and a blind space captain who venture forth to encounter a great white comet and destroy the destroyer. My drama premieres as an opera in Paris this autumn. But for now, the university wrote back that they hardly dared do my play. It had no women in it, and the ERA ladies on campus would descend with ball bats if the drama department even tried. Grinding my bicuspids into powder, I suggested that they would mean, from now on, no more productions of Boys in the Band, no women, or The Women, no men, or Counting Heads, male and female, a good lot of Shakespeare that would never be seen again, especially if you count lines and find that all the good stuff went to the males. I wrote back. Maybe they should do my play 1 week and The Woman the next. They probably thought I was joking, and I'm not sure that I wasn't. For it is a mad world, and it will get madder if we allow the minorities, be they dwarf or giant, orangutan or dolphin, nuclear head or water conservationist, pro-computerologist or neo-Luddite, simpleton or sage, to interfere with aesthetics. The real world is the playing ground for each and every group to make or unmake laws. But the tip of the nose of my books, or stories, or poems, is where their rights end and my territorial imperatives begin, run, and rule. If Mormons do not like my plays, let them write their own. If the Irish hate my Dublin stories, let them rent typewriters. If teachers and grammar school editors find my jawbreaker sentences shatter their mush-milk teeth, let them eat stale cake dunked in weak tea of their own ungodly manufacture. If the Chicano intellectuals wish to recut my wonderful ice cream suit so it shapes zoot, may the belt unravel and the pants fall. For let's face it, digression is the soul of wit. Take philosophic asides away from Dante, Milton, or Hamlet's father's ghost, and what stays in is dry bones. Lawrence Stern said it once, digressions incontestably are the sunshine, the life, the soul of reading. Take them out, and one cold eternal winter would reign in every page. Restore them in the writer. He steps forth like a bridegroom, bids them all hail, brings in variety, and forbids the appetite to fail. In sum, do not insult me with beheadings, finger choppings, or the lung deflations you plan for my works. I need my head to shake or nod, my hand to wave or make into a fist, my lungs to shout or whisper with. I will not go gently onto a shelf, de-gutted, to become a non-book. All you umpires, back to the bleachers. Referees, hit the showers. It's my game. I pitch, I hit, I catch, I run the bases. At sunset, I've won or lost. At sunrise, I'm out again, giving it the old try. And no one can help me, not even you. But thank you for listening.